There's a super common pattern in healing and growth spaces, and it's one of those things that's hard to name without sounding like you're attacking something that people hold sacred. And there's a part of me that wants to be careful here and tiptoe around, but, well, let's get into it. The pattern is people mistake increased sensitivity for increased capacity. They feel more, they notice more, they can describe their internal state with extraordinary nuance. They have new language for the subtleties that they never maybe tracked before, and they take that expanded awareness as evidence that their nervous system is growing. But often it isn't. What's actually happening is that perception has increased, while tolerance has actually stayed exactly the same. The system is registering more signal, but it hasn't learned how to withstand that signal any better than before, especially when life is complex. All right, before we go further, it's worth saying that different nervous systems fall into different traps in different ways. Some of us are drawn toward introspection and sensation naturally, and others of us arrive there later, but the underlying issue is the same. So if you've never looked at how your personal nervous system processes pressure, we got you. The Somatic Skins Quiz is linked below in the description. And really, without that clarity, people will tend to double down on exactly the things keeping them stuck. So start there and then come back. Okay, so let's actually slow this whole thing down and look at the biology of feeling versus perception. Feeling is input. Growth is adaptation. A nervous system does not grow because it detects more information. It reorganizes itself in response to demand. That reorganization only happens when the system is exposed to stress, stays present long enough for learning to occur, body learning, not head, and then recovers. And that sequence matters. Sensitivity increases perception. It does not increase resilience by default. Nervous systems often become less stable. More signals come online, more sensations demand attention, more internal events feel urgent. We're loading the system, But then the system's ability to stay organized under those conditions, it hasn't changed. And so life doesn't get easier. It gets louder. And that's where the trap really sets in. People begin to orient their entire growth process around monitoring internal experiences. It's like they'll have a new full-time job. They track moods, they track and scan sensations, they analyze emotional weather, they'll ask, what am I feeling right now? Far more often than they'll ask, what can my system actually hold? And because the culture around them reinforces that kind of introspection, it praises awareness, it validates more sensitivity, it rewards emotional fluency, it'll feel like progress. Meanwhile, the same stressors retain the same impact. Conflict will still hijack them, urgency still collapses their breath, exposure will still spike anxiety. Relational tension still destabilizes attention. Nothing fundamental has changed. And that's because noticing a reaction is not the same thing as reducing its charge. Naming an emotion is not the same as metabolizing it. Tracking sensation is not the same thing as staying organized while it intensifies. Processing is a biological event, not a reflective one. So for processing to occur, the nervous system has to have already built the bandwidth to remain present inside that discomfort long enough for adaptation to take place for a next level. That means that pressure must be applied at a precise dose that the system can survive without escape, suppression, or overwhelm. Then it must be cleared. Then it must be repeated. Without that cycle, emotions don't resolve, they accumulate. This is why you see people who are incredibly articulate about their inner world, but increasingly fragile in the outer one. They can explain exactly why something is hard for them, but that explanation doesn't reduce the impact when it happens again. If anything, sometimes it amplifies it, because the system has then learned to attend to the discomfort more closely without learning how to withstand this. Sensitivity in that context becomes a liability because one is always taking their emotional temperature and deciding whether or not they are sick enough or well enough to do life. And this is the part that's hardest to hear in spaces devoted to healing or growth. Focusing on feelings can actively prevent nervous system growth when it replaces capacity training. Attention collapses inward. Stress becomes something to interpret rather than something normal to metabolize. The system learns vigilance instead of resilience, and so you don't become freer, you become more careful. This isn't because feelings are bad or awareness is wrong. It's because awareness without adaptation keeps the nervous system frozen at exactly the same developmental threshold. You end up with better language, but the same limits. Real growth shows up somewhere very specific. It shows up when a situation that used to overwhelm you no longer does. When internal pressure rises and your breath doesn't immediately tighten. When emotion moves through without dictating your behavior. When recovery happens faster, not because you talked yourself down and did some mental gymnastics, but because your system knows how to clear. That's capacity. And capacity is trained, not discovered. This is why the Somatic Skins emphasizes this always on how nervous systems actually adapt, not just how they perceive and explain. Feelings are treated as data points, not destinations, and the work is about building the underlying ability to stay organized so that the sensation stops being in charge. It's also why inside the Prestige, our somatic academy, the work happens under real simulated conditions, time pressure, relational dynamics, uncertainty, where sensitivity alone isn't enough. Those environments reveal whether capacity is present or not, and they provide the conditions where it can actually grow. The goal isn't to feel less. It's to stop being destabilized by what you feel, needing to withdraw, think, process, and then reemerge. If sensitivity has increased, but life still hits you in the same way, that's not insight waiting to happen. That's a nervous system that hasn't been given the training that it needs. Growth does not come from feeling everything. It comes from being able to stay when it matters. If you love this stuff and you want to train it live with us, join us for a season in the Prestige. Otherwise, thanks for staying tuned for this video. Please do like and subscribe. It encourages us and it also helps the channel out. And I'll see you next time.